first time. And I remember very clearly what Pastor John said that night, that he walked into this room and felt like God was doing something new. God was doing something new to raise up a new generation of Asian Americans for global mission, and that was something very special. And so since then, we've had 5 Passion for the Nation conferences at different churches throughout Southern California, and it's just been a great experience having Pastor John at every single one of them, speaking to us and sharing with us his experience. So I'm so happy to be here today, that we can invite Pastor John to speak to our church specifically for what we can do for global evangelism and mission. And I'm just really excited about that. I'm excited for this morning. I'm excited for tomorrow's 2 sessions. Is just going to be amazing. So I pray that God will open up our eyes and ears to hear what the Spirit has to say to us. Amen. So let's welcome Pastor John today.
Well, I'm really glad you're here. I have a question. How many of you are from the Taiwanese congregation? Raise your hand. Okay. And how many of you are from Mandarin? And how many of you are from the 1.5? And is there anybody from the EM side? Okay. Well, that's a pretty, almost 1/4 each. That's great. I am really thrilled to be here. I don't know how many of you are aware of some of the history of EFC. My father came to start to be involved. The First Evangelical Church, Glendale, was started by a man named George Chua. He was a Chinese evangelist from the Philippines. And right after the Immigration Act got passed by the United States government, he started a fellowship called First Evangelical Fellowship at a house to minister to students from Taiwan and Hong Kong, Singapore, and so forth. They were going to Cal State LA and USC, UCLA. This was in 1965. And about 6 months after that, he asked my father to come and lead this little fellowship that was still meeting in his house, and that became First Evangelical Church. So I was 3 years old when the church, when we first landed, and as we grew up, Henry Ting was in my Sunday school class. You guys know Henry Ting? So he's, he's from EFC LA, and then I think he was, what year did EFC start? 68, 69? I think it was 68. Right. So what happened is the leaders of EFC asked my father, can we start a new church for Taiwanese speaking? And my father said yes. And so as a result, EFC started, and they chose the same letters, EFC instead of FEC. Right? So we're actually cousins. Right? So EFC LA was kind of the daughter, right? And then EFC Orange County was the granddaughter, and you're the great-granddaughter? Okay. Right? And we were planted from FEC Glendale. Okay, so we're part of the same family, right? And this is generational because the plans and purposes of God always come through lines of churches. Now, when we talk about God, He's the God of not just Abraham, but He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? That means God is a God of generations. The blessings of God come from one generation to the next. And I think this is very, very important because as we get older, most of us are a little older, right? Some of you are younger. As we get older, we start to think about how God's going to work with our children and our next generation. And I think this is the right way for us to think. My son, Evelyn and I have one son. He's 21, and he's getting married this summer. He's getting married early. Yeah. Which is a whole other story. So I'm not going to talk about that right now. But, what I hear from all my friends is that being a grandfather or grandmother is the greatest joy. It's kind of like payback from getting to be a parent. And I think it's appropriate for us to think about that generational blessing coming from one generation to another. Now, I think it was probably in the early 1840s, there was a young boy who was stolen from his village in China. A bunch of pirates came and took a bunch of young children, and they stole him from his house, and they went down the river in China, and they came to Xiamen. And when they got to Xiamen, they sold these children. And there was a Christian family that bought this little boy as a servant and adopted him as their son. Now, the reason they did this is because American missionaries came to Xiamen after the opening of the Opium War. And Xiamen was one of 5 port cities in China that the British forced open. And of course, the missionaries came in after the soldiers. And this family had become Christians because of the missionaries that came from Minnesota. And so they bought this young boy and they raised him as their son. And the first church in all of China was planted in Xiamen in 1848. And this young boy helped build that church as a kid with his hands. And he became the first Chinese pastor of that first church in China about 1872. And that man was my great-great-grandfather. Okay? Yeah, it's really amazing. We, Evelyn and I had a chance to go back to Xiamen and learn about the history back at that time. Now, I feel very, very blessed because, you heard something about my father's line. Well, this is my mother's line. And so, as far as I understand, all 4 of my grandparents were Christians. And we've had, in my mother's line, I had a line of Christians for 6 generations now. So, there's a way in which I understand that I have a certain privilege because of all the prayers of my parents. Sometimes I say, it's like I'm skiing and I get to ski downhill because all the generations before me piled up all these prayers into a big mountain, right? And so this is something that we get a chance to do for our children. And I think that's true for us as parents, but it's also true for us as churches. It's also true for us as churches. I come here, to be honest with you, I don't spend very much time in Chinese churches anymore. I grew up in a Chinese church. We planted up a center. We're 60% Asian, maybe 45% Chinese at this point. We've got all kinds of other people in it and so forth and so on. So our church is not that Chinese anymore. But when I come here and look at you, I think this is a healthy Chinese church. Because you've got great love between the congregations, you've got lots of young people, and it's really cool. And there's a dream that God has for your church, right? And I think the most precious thing is that if we could ask God, what dream do you have for our church? Because you're the groom, we're the easer. What dream do you have, and how can we see your dreams be fulfilled? And, when I was talking with parents yesterday, I told Pastor, I can say things that he can't say because I'm from outside, right? But, the issue is that can we have God's dreams for our children instead of our own dreams? For our physical children, can we adopt and get behind the dreams that God has for these little children who are here, for your middle schoolers, for your high schoolers, for your college students? That's the greatest thing we can do if we understand that we're the easer, right? So what I want to do today is share a little bit about our church and our journey, and I have a goal. I have an agenda, okay? My agenda is hopefully to encourage you to become a church that can grow in its missions impact. And I particularly would be very excited if 10 years from now you could tell me, we sent 10 of our young people overseas as church planters. Okay? I think you can do it. Maybe more. But I just want to set a low number to give you something concrete. When you look at your young people, if you could think 10 years from now, 10 of our own people are going to be serving overseas as missionaries, I think that's something you can do. You already have 3 or 4, right? Something like that. So, okay. So I'll tell you a little bit about our church. And today, the message I want to give is to grow your church in accomplishing the Great Commission. All right? here's a little bit about our church. This is who we are. We planted Epicenter Church in 2003 from FEC Glendale. So we're now for almost 15 years old. Okay, I tell people our church has glasses and braces and pimples. We're about 700 adults and kids in our church. Let's see, we've planted 2 Spanish-English churches in LA, a Chinese congregation in Pasadena. I never thought we would do that. So we have a Chinese congregation that's about 2.5 years old. They're about 55, and out of those, 80% of them were Buddhists 3 years ago. It's really cool. We planted a church in West LA, and then the church that we planted in Lincoln Heights, that's a Spanish-English church, planted another church in East Los Angeles, and also they planted another church in Mexico. So we have some grandchildren, which is really cool, right? And this is what I mean by thinking about the church as a movement instead of as a monument. Okay, let me just say that again. We have to think about the church as a movement instead of a monument. You're already part of a movement, right? EFC is a movement of churches that have gotten planted. One church plants another church, plants another church. That's the heart of God, and I think it's appropriate for you to consider how you can become a movement and to be more intentional about it. Whoops. Okay, let's go back. Oh, we're going to have to do this again. Okay. So here's the other thing. Back in 1992, I was a youth pastor at FEC Glendale, and I invited a man to come do a youth retreat for us. I think at that time we had about 40 or 50 kids, and this man was a missions conference speaker, but a youth guy, and I brought him from Boston all the way to Los Angeles to do a youth retreat. And I remember prayer walking around the campground beforehand, and I felt like the Lord asked me a question. He said, "Son, will you tithe 10% of your kids to global missions?" And I said, "Sure." I'd only been a youth pastor for a year and a half, so I didn't really understand what he asked me. And so I said, "Sure." And lo and behold, at the end of this thing, I had 5 6th graders that stood up and said they want to be missionaries. That's scary. How do you take a 6th grader and help him to be a missionary? I didn't know. And that was 25 years ago, and I've spent all these years trying to figure out the answer to that question. So what I want to do is just share with you a little bit about that process. Right now, our church has 55 adults and children that have been raised in our church that are serving overseas as missionaries. So we're not quite 10%. I think there's at least 4 or 5 college students and then 5 other families that we have that are considering and we're hoping to send in the next couple years. So we're not a very large church, right? We're just a little larger than you, but I think God's helped us to be very, very focused on trying to think about church planning and sending people out. So what I want to do is share with you some of the things that we've learned and some of the things that we're trying. And at the end, I want to give you kind of an opportunity because there's something that we're doing this year in our larger association of churches that I think can be very helpful for you in your journey. Now, we are no longer part of FECA. That's a whole long story that I don't have time to tell you about, but we became part of something called the Antioch Movement of churches based in Texas. Okay, it's led by a man named Jimmy Seibert from Antioch Community Church, and there's 30 United States churches here. And in our movement, there's about 350 church planners on 76 church planning teams that are in 40 countries. Okay, and so the movement that we're a part of is very focused on how to raise up and send missionaries from our own churches, because I think we understand that if that's what it is to be an easier, then that's what we have to do. And so I think in some ways our church is much more focused on this than many other churches, and because we understand that that's what's really important. This was the place where Evelyn and I were at back in 2003. We were about to plan our church, and I was in Waco, Texas at this man's church. And I'll just tell you a story to fill in a little bit. When I first met Jimmy, it was in 2001. I had gone to this little conference for pastors, and this was right after 9/11, right after the Twin Towers crashed and so forth. And it was just a scary time here in the United States, if you remember, for those of you who are old enough. And I met Jimmy Seibert. I don't know how many of you remember, right before 9/11 happened, there were two American missionaries from Texas that got abducted by the Taliban and were holding them in the Taliban prison. Does anybody remember this? Okay, so these were two girls from Jimmy's church, okay? And their church at that time was a year and a half old, or 2 years old. And he had a 24-year-old and a 28-year-old from his church. One of them lived in his house for 3 years, that they sent to Afghanistan, and they got abducted by the Taliban, and then right after, by Osama bin Laden's people, and then after this, then 9/11 happened. So I was sitting there in a small group, and his girls were still in prison. So we asked him, well, what's it like to have some of your girls be captured by the Taliban? Right? And he's in the middle of it. And he said, well, before I answer that question, let me explain to you a little bit about who we are. He said, we really believe that the role of the local church is to raise up its own people and send them as missionaries overseas. So before these girls went out, we put them in a school that our church runs. That's kind of like a YWAM discipleship training school for 9 months. And one of the things they do is they study the book of Acts for 9 months, and they ask, if this was your only understanding of the church, what would you conclude about the vision of the church? What would you conclude about the values and practices of the church? What would you conclude about the way that church ought to be done? And fourthly, what is the relationship between suffering and growth of the gospel? And I remember he said that last thing. I was like, Chinese people don't talk about that. You know, it seemed kind of like the house church, you know. But his was an American with young people. He was talking about this. So he said, before we ask them to go out, we ask them to write your 3 greatest fears down on a piece of paper. And they say, I'm afraid I'm going to get abducted. I'm afraid I'm going to get raped. I'm afraid my children are going to get taken. And he said, if you can't trust God with these, then he probably hasn't called you. So don't go on the mission field. Wow. So he said, you know, we knew things were getting dangerous in Afghanistan. Before they, 6 weeks before they were there, we were in Istanbul meeting with our girls, and we said, hey, ladies, it's getting kind of dangerous around here. We're hearing things from the State Department. What do you think? What's God's calling? And they prayed and said, God called us here to be with these Afghani women because they have no opportunity to hear the gospel, and we don't think he's changed his mind since then. He said, okay, so we're going to hang in here with you. Well, these girls were sharing the Jesus film, and as a result, they got abducted by the Taliban. So he said, so let me just tell you where we are as a church. He said, our church is just 2 years old. We have people praying 24 hours a day for their release. We're asking that angels come from heaven to release them from prison. We know that's a biblical prayer. Yeah. He said, but we also know it's biblical for them to stay in prison for a long time to write letters that encourage the church. I was like, wow. I'm not used to people talking that way about the Bible. And then he said, and we also know from church history that some people in this situation lose their lives, and we understand that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Those are the 3 biblical prayers. We're praying for the first one, but we understand all 3 of them. And I thought, my goodness, I have never heard anything like this in my life, right? I'm a son of a pastor. I went to Christian college. I went to Fuller Seminary. I think of myself as a Bible person, but I'm not used to the Bible that way. It really got me. And so, not long after that, the Navy SEALs went in and rescued the girls from prison and got them out. It was fascinating because one of the things that Jimmy said is, we know whenever something gets in the news, that is a sign for us to intercede and pray. And at that time, there was less than 100 known believers in the entire nation of Afghanistan. But because those girls were in prison, churches from throughout the world were praying for that nation. He said we knew that was of God. And today there's a thriving house church movement in Afghanistan. So it's worth it. But see, that's very threatening for me. This is when Evelyn and I first started thinking, wow, we felt kind of slapped by the Lord. Like, your Chinese American spirituality needs some adjustment. Here are these white people that were really challenging us, not because they were saying this, it's because of by their lives and by their example. And it was amazing. On the day that the girls were let out from prison, Jimmy said he got a phone call and from one of the news organizations, and it was from CBS, and they said, "Hey, your girls have just been arrested." And he called his people, "Is this true?" So he went to the sanctuary, and the worship team was playing, and everybody was running around with banners and so forth and so on. And then all the news organizations showed up: CBS, ABC, NBC. Everybody was there. CNN, they're all there. And so then Jimmy got on national television, and he preached the gospel. And he actually led the NPR reporter to the Lord that day. Barbara Bradley Haggerty, she's still the religion reporter for NPR, led her to the Lord that day. And then they flew off to Istanbul, and he said, I was sitting in a small 10 by 10 room, and I had Heather and Dana in front of me, and behind me was Dan Rather and Ted Koppel, all these big news anchors. He said, I had 10 minutes with them. And he said, this is what I said. You know why the Lord's called you? He said, so I have a question for you. On the other side, there's going to be all kinds of money. There's going to be all kinds of men who are going to get you famous and want to marry you. He said, right now, you have to decide whether you want to become Amy Grant or Mother Teresa. Wow. And it was amazing because these two girls, one of them, they wrote a book, went to the White House. They donated all their money to Afghanistan. And then they went on a speaking circuit for many months. One of them, Dana Curry, was only able to do it for about 6 months, and she said, I'm losing my life. And so she went to spend a year with Jackie Pullinger. And the other one continued to do that work, and about 9 months in, Jimmy saw her, and she was really, really thin. And he said, hey, Heather, you don't look very good. What's going on? She said, well, you told me anytime I speak anywhere, I should fast for a day. And I've been doing a lot of speaking. And so today Heather lives in Iraq and Dana lives in Morocco. It's been 18 years and they're still serving God. Wow. I learned this and I thought, that's the kind of church I want to raise. That's the kind of church I want to be a part of. I want to raise up young people that are able to do that. That's what got us started in this whole process. Okay, so I have a question. Where is your church? Is your church, I know you're not here. I have done this workshop a couple times. There's some churches that don't have any formal missions ministry. There's some churches that have a small group of people that are interested in missions, and they're the ones that do everything and nobody else does anything, right? And you probably have friends in a church like that. There's some churches that have a formal missions ministry that's not very strong. Other churches, and I think you're probably more over here, that sponsors regular short-term mission trips. There's other churches that are beginning the process of mobilizing their own people to serve God overseas long-term, and then other churches that sent long-term members to serve overseas. Now, I'll just tell you a little bit about our church. At this point, our church actually functions as a sending agency for our own people because these are our sons and daughters. So aside from the regular ministry we have at the church and the congregations and so forth, I have a missions director. We have a couple administrators. If somebody comes through our church and they want to serve, like we've got a young couple that want to go to Japan as missionaries, so then we start them in a process where they go through a couple schools that we have. We start discipling them, and then they go through a candidating process where they have to fill out a bunch of forms, and they do a psychological profile and a marriage assessment and so forth. Then they go through a church planning intensive that's run by Antioch, and then we send them as the missions agency. We help them get health insurance. We help them work through their budget, and then we're there on the phone talking with them. We go to visit them. We provide pastoral care. We provide intercession and prayer for them, right? So that's Now, most churches aren't going to do that, right? But what I want to encourage you to do is to sort of think about moving this way. Yeah.
是他刚刚讲的，就是 sending agency 就是一个差会，好像一个宣教机构差会一样，所以他们不只是一个教会，他们的教会也是一个差会，一个宣教机构，所以人家会来申请当宣教师，他们的教会会培训他们，会采访他们，会装备他们一段时间，可能半年、1年的时间，然后差派出去，所以不只是一个教会，是教会跟差会合一的一个教会。
And let me just explain a couple other things about this. We today live in a sending agency environment. Okay, for the first number of years, this is what we did: is we sent people through other agencies, which I think is fine. But let me tell you, you're probably aware that when people go as missionaries, 50% of them come back after the first 2 years. Okay, why is that? Because I think the church was originally called to go and send its own people. Right? What often happens is that young people go to a missions conference and then they raise their hand and then their church supports them and then they send them through some sending agency. Okay? This is what often happens though. If you go through OMF, let's say you send one of your young people named Rachel to a place in China. And she goes with a person from Brazil who's charismatic and goes with another person who comes from a Christian Reformed church in Holland, and with a Baptist from Kansas. And so these 4 people don't know each other at all. And so then the mission agency asks you to write a bunch of records of recommendation. You say, oh, we love Rachel. She's going to be really great, right? But they don't actually know her at all. So they run her and do some kind of psychological assessment to make sure she's okay. And then Rachel and all these other 4 people meet in a team training in Littleton, Colorado, and then they get sent over to China, and they don't know each other, and they have different ideas of what the church is because it's based on their own experiences. So they're going through cross-cultural things in terms of learning how to be in China. They're also working through cross-cultural things as a team because they've never met each other, and they have all kinds of different cultures because Brazilians are very extroverted and Chinese are very quiet and so forth and so on. And then they also don't have the same idea of what they're trying to do. On top of that, many churches don't know how to raise up their children to work through inner healing processes and deliverance. So, you're probably aware that many, many times there's 2 reasons why people fail on the mission field. The first one is because of conflict on a team. And the second one is because people have all kinds of sin issues. People have affairs. People have all kinds of other things because people don't take the time to disciple their people well, and the missions agency can't do it. They get an application in the mail. How are they supposed to know what kind of spirituality somebody has and whether they have issues with their mother and whether they have a porn addiction? They don't know. So I just want to kind of pull back so you can understand, if you're a church that wants to send people, that there's problems with that kind of model. Do you want to translate that? I don't know. Did you understand what I was saying? This is very, very important.
大家有听懂吗？
Okay,
那就
fine. Okay. So this is the reason why we want to send our own people. We disciple them. We know what their issues are. Right? I have young people that want to come on the mission field, and we get to know them. We're like, no, you need to stay here because you're not ready. You're going to go over there and blow up. So because I love you, I'm going to make you stay here. You need to get a bunch of healing, go to counseling, all this sort of stuff, right? We pull them together. We create teams, and because they're part of the same church, they understand what they're trying to do, right? As part of the EFC thing, you guys understand how to do a prayer station. You know how to do a gospel station. This is what you do, right? And so we're part of a larger network, and so our people can go with churches from other Antioch churches and go and build something together. So it cuts down on a lot of the noise and a lot of the reasons why it is that missionaries don't make it on the field.
I know what to say now.
Okay.
OK， 大概啦，就是为什么我们如果派人出去，他们是一个差会，跟一个差会出去的话，为什么他们平均1年到2年就回来了？他们不会待更长期的时间，因为是 因为在那边呢，很多时候都会失败。第一，他们可能团队里面不合一，因为他们一个可能是浸信会的，一个可能是灵恩派的，一个可能是改革宗的所以对教会的定义、对上帝的认知都不一样。所以出去你要跟你的团队处得来，在神学上要一个概念，然后又要面对跨文化的这个人群，这是非常大、非常非常大的挑战。所以很多50%可能1-2年就回来了。可是如果是然后呢，另外一方面是生命的问题，我们没有花足够的时间来培养他们内在生活，可能他们有很多罪在里面，可是也不知道，然后差会也不知道，然后就出去了，然后就出问题了，然后又回来了。可是如果是一个教会，这个人是从我们教会里面长大的，我们认识他，我们知道他的强处跟软弱，我们知道他是怎么样的人，然后我们也是同一个神学的理念一起出去的话，这成功率会比较高。
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit and then we can take some time for some questions. Okay. What is the church? Yesterday I said the church was the Ezer. Let me just fill this out a little bit so you understand how we at Epicenter, how we understand church. What we tell people is the church is Ephesians 4 from Matthew 28 to see Revelation 7. Okay, Ephesians 4 from Matthew 28 to see Revelation 7. So here's Ephesians 4. It says that God gave the church to prepare God's people to do works of service. Okay? So the main role of the church is to equip its people. Right? What we try and tell people is that I'm not a minister, you're actually the minister. I'm the equipper. My role as the pastor is to equip you to do the work of ministry. What work of ministry? To do the Great Commission. Right? We want to equip our people to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to obey. Why? To see Revelation 7. Okay? And this is to see, after there, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every tribe, people, nation, and language. And they were standing before the throne singing, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." Right? I always imagine in my mind going to this place where there is millions upon millions of people singing Revelation 7. Salvation belongs to our God, right? Can you imagine it? Now, if we went there now, there'd be all these holes. This hole of this people group in Indonesia. This hole of this people group in China. This hole of this group of people in India that don't have the ability to sing salvation belongs to our God because nobody's translated. Nobody's gone over there. That's what the missions world calls an unreached people. See, because there's unreached peoples, then that room isn't full yet. So we as a church, as the Ezer, have an opportunity to go to that people. That's what the role of the church is. Because there's unreached people that don't know yet. Right? It's the heart of Jesus to see that every one of these people come to know Him. So the role of the Ezer is to go out there and find them. Okay. So the whole point is to prepare God's people to do the Great Commission so all peoples give God glory. That's how I understand the church. So you can understand here that I don't think the church is about Pasadena. Our church is in Pasadena, but the impact of our church isn't Pasadena, it's out there. Right? Pasadena is given to us by God to see that those things happen. And my focus has to be on outside the walls of the church. So the theology of the local church is Ephesians 4 from Matthew 28, see Revelation 7. Now, the second one is the parable of the talents. You know this story. There was a man, his boss went away and gave him with some money, and so he gave one servant 5 talents, another 2 talents, another 1 talent. He said, "Go and invest this, and then one day I'm going to return." Right? And one man took the 5 and doubled it. Another one took the 2 and doubled it. The third one was afraid, so he hid it in the ground. And then the master came back and he said, "Oh, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with 5. Now I'm going to give you 5 more. So now you have 10. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've had 2. Now I'm going to give you 2 more. But you wicked and lazy servant. And then he gives the 1 talent to this other one. Okay? I think that's a church parable. That's a parable to pastors. That's a parable to elders. That's a parable to deacons. That's a parable to mission committee members. Because God gives us people. The talents aren't money, it's people. And the question is, when God gives me people, am I going to invest them for a kingdom return so they multiply, or am I going to hide them in the ground because I'm afraid? And God's going to come back one day, and he's going to say, so what did you do with the people I gave you? Wow, that's scary, right? But there's an opportunity. And I think if you think about churches, the reason why EFC churches have grown is because you've understood this. You've invested, you've sent people to plant more churches. And so now you're 30 years old. I think this is a time to be reminded about what your church is really about. That you are the stewards of 500, and I don't know how many people you have, 550 people? And are you going to invest them for a return? Now see, here's the interesting thing. The man that had 5 ended up with 11 instead of 10. Right? And I imagine to myself, the master went and he went on another trip. And then he came back, and maybe this time he gave more money and there was more servants. So then there was one that had 11, another one that had 4, and another one that had 7, another one that had 3, and it happened again. And so the story keeps happening over and over again, and that church begins to grow because it keeps working and understanding the parable of the talents over and over again. You understand? Okay. So I think this helps us to think about the way that church life ought to be. And really, the church is the hope of the world. All the problems that are going out there, I think we're very, very clear. Democrats don't have the answer, and neither do Republicans. Right? It's the church. The church is the one that has the answers. So we've got to stand up and change the world. So I think the end vision, what the church is meant to be, is to raise up young people and older people that go to the nations to raise up other people. So right now, our church has a 57-year-old woman and a 70-year-old woman that are on the mission field. We sent a 70-year-old woman to Turkey a year and a half ago, as a missionary. Right? They don't have to just be young people. This lady's wanted to be a missionary all her life, and we're finally able to send her. You know? So she's learning Turkish right now. And after she learns Turkish, she's going to learn Iranian because they're trying to minister to refugees from Iran. It's great, you know? Short little lady. Right? That's our joy, to send out as many people as we can to the nations to start other churches. Okay? And plant other churches to do the same thing. That's how I understand what my role as a senior pastor is. You know, one day, I just turned 56, okay? So one day when I turn 70 or 75, my greatest joy would be to go to a meeting where all the people that we've sent out bring all the churches that they've planted and all the churches that they've planted, and I get to meet people from all kinds of countries that I've never met, but I've only heard about. In India and China and Thailand and Africa and Asia, that would be my joy, because those would be my great-grandchildren, right? And I think that would be your greatest joy as a church, is to be able to look back at your 50th anniversary and start seeing the churches that you planted and the young men and women that you planted out among the nations doing all kinds of things. So again, you know, my personal desire is to see 10% of our congregation go to the nations to start planting churches that plant other churches. And I believe that our church in Pasadena is meant to touch the nations. Where did I get that? I got that from the Bible. That's what the book of Acts did, right? Antioch was a church that sent other churches, that sent missionaries out, that started other churches, that started other churches. That's where I get it from. It's biblical. And this is where I think is so critical, is that we get our understanding of the church from the scriptures rather than just from our own personal history. So how do we do that? That's the big question. And this is something that I spent a lot of time learning from others about, and that's what I want to share with you. So we talked about this scale before, okay? I think I think your church hopefully is pretty good at envisioning people to do this. If you're in this phase, this is an envisioning phase of your church's missions program. If you have a formal missions ministry that's not too strong, this is what I would call a mobilizing phase, and then this one would be an equipping phase. Okay? Once you get out here, you will be part of a sending phase and a supporting phase. And let me say that it's not necessary that your church send out its own missionaries and you be the sending agency. That doesn't really matter to me. But I think what I want to encourage you to do is think about how to move this way in your church's missional development. So I'm going to tell you some things we've learned. I want to talk briefly about these phases. Okay? This phase of envisioning is giving our young people a heart for the nations. Giving our people a heart for the nations. Now, I know you do already. I read, and I've been meeting people. I just went to Iraq, and I talked to some of your young people. They said, oh, yeah, I went to San Francisco, and I had a chance to see. That's awesome, right? What I preached yesterday was an envisioning message. I was trying to help people to go, I want to do that. That's what envisioning does, is it gives people the desire. I want to go out and do that, right? And because, here's the thing, my secret desire over this weekend is that you end up with a bunch of young people that want to be missionaries. Because then, if they want to be missionaries, then you're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to figure out how to encourage them, how to equip them, how to get them ready, and they'll pull your church along, right? So that's my hidden agenda for you, okay? Right? So envisioning. Now, here's the next step. Mobilizing is creating experiences which help them dream about their place in God's work. Now, mobilizing, we normally think about mobilizing in terms of conferences. I think with young people, mobilizing is about experiences, not about talking to somebody. It's about helping them to have an experience. Then you have this whole equipping phase, which is how to teach and give a young person or an older person experiences that help them develop the skill and character to do the things that God's calling them to do. All right? And then you've got these phases of sending people overseas to do that work and supporting them so that when they're over there, they can make it and do it. All right? Any questions here? Okay, what I want to do is talk about some of these things in a little more depth, but I want you to understand what it is that we're talking about. And again, I think, you guys are somewhere in this phase. I think there's probably some things you can do here and here to help your missions program be more focused. And then this one's really, really important. Okay, so first of all, for envisioning, as a church, we try and be extremely clear that the main role of the church is to plant churches and to equip people. That's what we're here for. And so we actively shape ministries to try and do that. Because my goal is to raise up as many church planters as I can, my children's ministry, my youth ministry, my college ministry is focused on that. Let me explain what I mean. We're in Pasadena. We're about 20 miles or 18 miles from Azusa Pacific University. It's a long way, but we decided we needed to go and start a ministry from scratch at APU. We didn't have any students there. We decided we want to start a ministry from scratch because God will call Christian college students to go to the mission field. Okay? And I'm an APU grad. Okay? We had one of our board of advisors basically say that he gave, back in 2004, God's given me a prophetic word. I think you're supposed to start a college ministry at APU. At that time, our church was only a year old. So we started praying, and in 2007, God brought a Christian couple to our church who had been hired as professors at that school. So I thought, yes, this is the way it's going to happen. And so we started working over there, and as soon as we could, I hired a full-time college pastor to go live across the street from them. Okay? So our church has something like InterVarsity at that campus. Right now, we have about 70 or 80 college students. Most of them are white. Okay? But, and they live on campus. There's 5 cell groups that meet on campus. We do early morning prayer at 5 o'clock in the morning. They do cell groups. They go out and evangelize. They take mission trips. We function just like a parachurch ministry, but we're run by the local church. Why? Because I want to get as many college students as I can to bring them on mission trips so I can make them church planners. Does this make sense? So again, because I understand what the goal is, that's what I'm trying to do. We also do this with our high schoolers. Right, with our middle schoolers and high schoolers, we try and create revival experiences and teach them how to pray for their campuses so they can learn how to be evangelists. We train our 2, 3, 4, 6-year-olds how to hear the Lord and how to pray for healing and how to share their faith. Because I want little children to think about missions as normal. Right? And I work with my parents to help them to do that. Okay? Does this make sense to you? Because I want to be focused on the end goal. Okay? Mobilizing. So we do short-term missions that help us to contribute to long church planning and give us curated experiences for our people. One which allows our young people to experience what we want them to do. And we always ask our leaders, our best leaders, to lead those teams. So we lead teams every year. And I take the young people with the most potential and I lead them myself. I drive out to Azusa Pacific. I ask my college pastor, tell me who your best leaders are, and I go and disciple them myself. That's what my job is as a pastor, because that's the most important thing to us. Right? I teach my college pastor, my high school pastor, my young adults pastor, who are the best leaders? Can they be church planners? And let's mobilize them to do it. Okay? Now, by the way, I'm not saying that if you're in the marketplace and you're a doctor that you're of no value. I want to talk about that in a little bit. But let me just say that according to Peter Wagner, church planning is the best form of evangelism known on the earth. So this is why we have to keep planting churches. Okay? So actually, you know what? Let me go back a point, and I'm going to have Evelyn come up here for a minute just to talk about. Sorry. I just want you to talk a little bit about your experience with medical missions and how we tie medical missions into this whole thing. I'll do this with you here.
Well, then he won't know if it's working. Hello? Okay, great. So I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I've been practicing medicine for 25 years in the emergency department. And it's my conviction that there's no difference between the sacred and the secular. Because if you think about Ed Savoso wrote a book about being a marketplace minister. And think about how many hours you spend in your workplace versus how many hours you spend doing church stuff on a Sunday morning, or you're doing some discipleship. You spend the bulk of your life, Monday through Friday, in your workplace. And why wouldn't God call you to be a light? He calls us to be a light and salt in the very place where we're at. So I want to even change that paradigm. So in my mind, I am on mission all the time, whether I'm in the workplace, in a supermarket, at church. So just to let you know, that's how I think, and that's how we train our people. And it doesn't even have to be medicine. It could be maybe you're a teacher. Think about the impact you have with your students and whatnot. You guys get the point. So basically...
Why don't you tell a couple stories just about your life in the ER, maybe 2 juicy stories.
Yeah, in the morning I pray, God, would you send divine appointments my way? And so I walk in the ER, I'm praying over my workspace, the computers, my nurses. They always say, I really love working with you because you always bring peace. See, we're called to be atmosphere shifters. if you're not in your workplace or wherever you're at, then you need to ask God why. And you bring, when someone's in a real bad mood, you feel that, right? But when someone's in a really good mood, full of hope and joy and peace, filled up with God's Spirit, people feel that too. And they ask you, what is it about you that makes you different? And I love that question because I throw back a question to them. I said, do you really want to know? They go, is it drugs? Is it alcohol? Is it self-therapy? I said, no, it's having a relationship with Jesus. And they're always taken aback. What? I've been to church before. I don't experience that. So I take it, then I go right into my testimony and the 4 spiritual laws. And we have a new tool that we use called the 3 circles that I've probably led maybe about 40 or 50 people to Christ with it since I learned it 2 years ago. Maybe if I have a chance, I'll be able to share it with you guys here, but it's been very effective. But I just want you guys to get the mindset that you're always on mission and you have an opportunity to spread that wherever you go. And so basically, a real quick story, a guy, one of my patients, I picked up his chart and on it said, needs detox, whether alcohol or drugs or something. And so I walk in the room and my first question always is, so what brings you in today? And he goes, well, you're not going to believe it if I told you. And I get really excited when they say that because there's a God story about ready to happen. I'm about ready to hear a God story. And he goes, basically about 12 hours before, I was in the middle of a drug deal. And the guy stole my money, $13,000, and he had a gun stuck in my mouth, a gun barrel. Just happened, one of my friends walked by, saw it, and kicked the gun out of the guy's hand. And he goes, see, I have a chipped tooth, but I'm alive. And then I said, well, how did you end up here in the emergency room? He goes, well, I was really bummed out. I was walking down the street, and I saw a man leaning against the wall. And he had a cap on, and it was a very unusual color. And I found when people tell these stories, usually if it's an angel or someone not of this earth, that color, that's a heavenly color. So it caught his eye. And the guy looked at him and said, hey, man, how you doing? And my patient goes, not good. I'm just not doing good today. And he goes, you need to come in here. And so he looks, and it's the door to a church. And they were right at that minute having a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. So you have Alcoholics Anonymous. This is for people addicted to drugs. So this guy got addicted to Vicodin because he had hurt his back, and now he was also selling drugs. And so he walks in, and the lady running the meeting goes, hey, you don't look too good because I'm not doing very well. He goes, you need to go to Glendale Adventist. That's a hospital I work at. Wrote down the name of the hospital, gave him cab fare, and then he had the opportunity to have one of 4 doctors, and I was the one who picked up his chart. And I told him, today really is your lucky day. And the first question I had for him is, why would God save you? And he told me the most incredible story. He said, well, I just happened to be reading a Bible that a friend gave to me. And I realized, with tears streaming down his face, is I'm not living the life that God wants for me. And it was so easy. I go, well, would you like to exchange your life that you're living right now for the one that God wants for you? And he said, yes. I go, well, just hold out your hands, and we're going to pray together. And so I had him do this. And my nurse walks in with a tray of food and then walks out. And so he received Christ, full repentance, and he goes, I know why now, why God saved me. He goes, I'm meant to leave a legacy with my 2 daughters, and I've not talked to them for 2 years. Granted, this is not how drug addicts talk. There was something very special about this man. He has a special mission. And so he basically said, I need a phone right now. I need to call them and tell them what I just did. I need to get back into their lives. I haven't talked to them in 2 years. So then, anyways, that's one of my stories. But I'm expecting that God's going to bring people my way in the workplace. And then I take advantage of those opportunities when I can. And I've led quite a few patients to the Lord, just being available. And literally that probably took me 5, maybe at the most 10 minutes. I don't get to spend lots of time with my patients in the emergency room, but it's just being aware and being trained. And so people ask me all the time, oh, do you do any medical missions? And I go, I do, but I'm very focused on what I'm doing. Because there's a lot of NGOs or nonprofits where they provide medical care, but they don't offer the gospel. And I really believe that the greatest healing that anyone could have, and I know you would agree with me, is being healed with the relationship between them and God. And so I call it the two-handed gospel. I'm providing very much needed relief, whether it's a disaster, where people need food, clean water, healthcare. We want to do that as Christians. We want to provide what their needs are, their physical needs, but then we also need to provide for their spiritual needs. And so I'm always looking to see, if I go on medical missions, it has to have both components.
And more than that, we specifically only do medical things that are directly tied to church planning.
Right, because as you know, you can receive Christ, but without discipleship, then
That's right.
that seed falls away. And so we're not just interested in someone making a decision. We're interested in seeing people discipled so that they could disciple others. And that's how you have a sustaining church planting movement. You have to have a longer term vision. And so even when I told the story last night about Sri Lanka, we started that church, but we also taught them how to reach out to their friends and that they could start. How do you get discipled? How do you share the kingdom values? How do you have a relationship with Jesus? Those are very key components in leaving a mark there, an expression of Jesus in a place. It's not just about making a decision. Whether it's an emotional decision or a true decision, you need to leave a mark. You need to leave a lasting expression of Jesus. So in Sri Lanka, in a very Hindu, Buddhist place, we left a mark of 100 brand new believers that were being discipled. Does that make sense? We did the same thing in Haiti after the disaster. We started sharing our faith and also providing very much needed medical care. I mean, it was crazy, the injuries that we were seeing. We saw resurrections. It was really a crazy time. But we left a lasting expression of Jesus there so they can make it in a very dark, dark land. And so I need to think further. Yes, God, I'm a physician, but I need to be very focused with my time and know what the end goal is.
Great, thank you. So this has to do with focus. Doing medical missions, building a house in Mexico is really good stuff. But I just don't have that much time and energy. I'm not to just do good things, but to do better things or do best things. Right? It has to do with choosing. And so, I'll give you an example of this in a little bit, but I just wanted to stop there for a minute just to sort of think, because it's not, in my mind, for our church, it's not enough to do short-term missions. We want to do the right kinds of missions that help us to accomplish the long-term goals that God has for us. Okay. So mobilizing, and then this whole thing about equipping, and I'm just going to let you read these things. But here's what's really important. My goal as a senior pastor isn't to see X amount of short-term missions take place. Or it's not to see X amount of short-term missionaries. 2 years ago, almost half of my church went on short-term missions. Okay? But that's not the most important thing, and I'll tell you why. The goal isn't just to send short-term missionaries. The goal isn't to send out missionaries that go on the field and come back after a year because they fell apart. What's the value of that? My goal isn't just to send out a short-term missionary who ends up deciding she wants to be a long-term missionary and stays for 2 years and then doesn't bear any fruit. It's not enough for her to go over there and last for 15 years and never lead anybody to Christ and start the old kind of colonialist white people's mission compound with a bunch of walls around it where people come to school but they never leave a church that grows. What's the point of that? Right? The whole goal is to go to an unreached people and for that missionary to start a church planting movement that starts multiplying so that those people can reach their own people. That's really the goal. Now I brought some things from Mission Frontiers so you can read about church planting movements. And I'm going to be talking about them a little bit on Sunday, but I'm going to repeat a story I'm going to tell on Sunday. That guy that was that's now in Iraq? When he was in Lebanon, what they were doing is they were focused on working with Palestinian refugees. More specifically, he was working with Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists. Okay? That's not a very safe thing to do. right? And how's he going to do it? Well, as a white American, he's not allowed to go into a Palestinian refugee camp, right? So we've been working with something called Discovery Bible Studies, focused on starting indigenous church planting movements. And so what Jason did is he met with this guy, I'll call him Noah. He met with Noah and said, this is how to study the Word of God. Here's the main principles. And he did it with Noah. And then Noah went and gathered a bunch of his friends in Arabic, and they would study the Word of God using the Discovery Bible Study process. And they studied. Jason never showed up. They stayed there for something like 7, 8, 9 months. And after reading through Luke and Acts, they said, you know what? We think this is true. We think we should get baptized. And so they said, how do we do it? And he said, well, let's just look at the Bible. So they baptized each other. Okay? Then they said, you know what? We think that this is true enough, so we want our friends to know. So he said, well, let me help you to start some new groups. So that one group then became 3 groups. Okay? Now, 2 of these guys were imams in their mosques. Okay? So they started 2 groups inside the mosque to study the Injil. Okay? And after, yeah, sure.
他刚讲到这些回教徒，他们把他们生命交给主，可是其中有2个是像伊斯兰教里面的牧师或传道人一样，所以当他们得到这个福音的时候，他们就进入他们的清真寺，他们要去吃那个，他们要去吃大饼了，没有，他们要去他们自己的清真寺里面。用可兰经里面有一部分是福音书，用那个开始来传福音。
Just stay up here. Let me just continue the story. So after another 6 or 9 months, that group then multiplied to start new groups.
那他们在那边聚集了，这个小组聚集了差不多6到9个月之后，他们开始又成为另外一个小组。
Within something like 3 years, they then had 30 groups that were studying the Bible inside the Palestinian refugee camp.
到了3年的时候，他们成为30个小组，在那些难民区开始有查经班。
I think there's somewhere around 60 or 70 groups, or 60 or 70 little churches now that are meeting inside these refugee camps, full of former Hamas and Hezbollah fighters.
今天有差不多60到70个，我们认为是小组啊，可是就是教会啊，基本上是好像教会小组一样啊，家庭小组、家庭教会里面呢，都是以前恐怖分子的那些战士。
Now, so this is what missiologists call a church planting movement.
宣教的这些在宣教圈里面用的词，这个就是植堂运动，这个叫植堂运动，非常快速成长。
In many parts of the world, especially in places where you can't build a church, this is how the church is actually growing.
很多的国家是受逼迫的，不可能在那边建一个大教堂，所以一定要是家庭教会的模式。
Of course, you know this sort of thing happens in China.
我们也知道像这样的事在中国已经发生很久了。
And so one of the cutting edges of missions is learning how to train people so they can start church planting movements.
所以现在最新的就是植堂的培训方法策略，就是怎么样的进入，怎么样的培养人可以参与这个植堂运动，快速发展。
I brought a couple magazines from Mission Frontiers that kind of talk about this process, and I think it'd be helpful for you to learn a little bit about what a church planting movement looks like, because it's non-traditional.
这2本杂志里面有讲关于植堂运动的一些概念，这个跟传统的植堂方式很不一样。
I mean, you guys have a great facility here.
我们有一个很好的场地。
But churches didn't actually have buildings until the 4th century.
但是呢，早期的教会根本没有像这么好的场地，直到差不多400年。
So that doesn't mean having a building is bad or it's wrong.
这不代表我们有教堂是一个不好的事。
But that does mean in lots of other contexts it's not necessary.
可是，在很多其他的国家，这个教堂不一定是需要的。
And so, you know, what we're focused on doing, along with many other missionaries, we're just trying to learn from them, is to see how to start church planting movements in various parts of the world.
所以我们也在国外认识很多宣教士，我们也 彼此的学习，怎么样在一个那种国家做植堂运动。
And this is the primary way that Muslims are coming to faith today.
在世界各地很多的伊斯兰教的回教徒是透过这样的植堂模式来信主的。
One of our friends that was in Jordan for about 10 or 12 years had an opportunity to start working with a guy, and they ended up seeing something like 50 or 70,000 Muslims get baptized over the last 5 years.
哇，就是有一个朋友他在 Jordan 那边做植堂运动，他跟另外一个弟兄一起合作传福音建立家庭教会。那how many people?
50 or 70,000.
12年里面看到5万到7万人信主。
It was hard. They were there for 15 years.
非常的困难，因为他们在那边花了15年的时间。
They ended up getting arrested
他们有被抓过，
and kicked out of the country
然后也被这个国家踢出去。
with their 4 children.
他们还有4个小孩。
But that movement's continuing.
可是，在那一个国家里面的植堂运动仍然继续的。
So again, as Chinese people, this is a little hard for us, right?
我们华人这个概念是非常困难的。
But this is the way that God's moving today.
但是神在这样的状况里面
And
做
so
工。
we, along with a lot of other people, are trying to train our young people to start those kinds of movements. And actually, in our church, Evelyn's leading that whole thing.
所以在我们的教会，他们正在培训年轻人做这样植堂运动的事工。
Okay. So thanks, Casey. So, when it comes to the equipping thing, what we want to do is help them to know how to start church planting and have the resilience to be able to last so that they can see it happen. And that's a long-term process. And then when it comes to sending and supporting, there we go. Ultimately, this is about our sending and supporting our sons and daughters. That's how we understand it. So we bring our young people in, we get to know them, we love them, and then we send them as our own family, right? And so, that's how we're understanding it. Again, there's all kinds of agencies that you can work with that can allow your church to be involved as a sending church without having to be a sending organization. So I just want to tell a story about the first time we did this. This was in 2012. You can see these are our APU college students. A lot of them are white, right? This is the Chinese leader who's from our church, and this is the missionary family here. So these other ones are all our students, okay? And so we said we want to create a mobilizing mission trip. And the goal is to try and help them to understand you can be a missionary that starts church planting movements. Okay? Maybe you want to translate this too, just to make sure we get the words right. So, what we're trying to do is use a carefully cultivated mission experience to mobilize people.
他们所设计的短宣，这是他们第一个大学生的短宣队一起去泰国。可是他们当设计这个短宣的时候，是非常非常的focus 在让这个经验能带到长期的植堂宣教计划。
And so we spent a bunch of time training these young people on how to pray for healing, how to do deliverance, how to lead people to Christ, how to start a discovery Bible study, how to do the initial steps of evangelism.
所以都会培训每一个短宣队员怎么样如何祷告，如何做医治祷告，如何赶鬼，如何带查经班，如何植堂。
And these kids are 19, 20 years old.
这些年轻人都19、20岁。
That's good. So we had them do this. Then they came up on Sunday before they were about to get commissioned, and I asked Louise, who's over here. I said, what's your goal? And she said, why? I said, why are you going to Thailand? And she said, well, you know what? 99.7% of people in Thailand are Buddhist. And I thought, you know what? We're going to pray and believe that you guys are going to be able to start a church in the 3 weeks you're there. Now, let me just point out, this is biblical. If you look at Paul's second missionary journey, Paul was getting beat up all the time, right? So he went to Lystra, and he shared his faith and started a little church, and then he got beat up and he had to leave, and he went from Lystra to Derbe, and he did it again. And scholars think he was only in those places for 3 weeks. How did Paul start a church in 3 weeks? This is challenging because we think of starting churches in a certain sort of way, but that's not what the Apostle Paul did. So then here's the question, how do we do that? So that's what we're trying to get our young people to think about. So the other thing that happened, I lost my train of thought. Okay, never mind. So we wanted to get them to go do this. And the other thing is we work with this guy, Nick Shores, and his wife, Stephanie, because we're trying to find a missionary on the other side that understands what we're trying to do so that they're going to have the best possible experience. We want this to be a win for the missionary, but we want it to be a win for our kids. Okay? So they get over there, well, they land, we've done a bunch of training, they've been fasting and praying, and they get there, and Nick and Stephanie say, we just want you to know it's been really hard here. We've been praying. We've only seen 3 people come to Christ. We haven't had any baptisms in the last 6 months. We're like, that's okay. So our kids get there. The first day they're there, he said, we've been kind of meeting with this lady that owns a massage parlor. Why don't you go visit them with some of our translators? So our team goes over there and shows up at this lady's house, and she's been bedridden for 3 months. Hasn't been able to get out of bed. And so they say, can we come up and pray for you? And so the massage parlor's on the first floor, and they're on the second floor. And so they get up there, and we sent up 2 of the girls. I think it was Rachel and Elaine. And they get up there, and they pray for her. I didn't know this. They told me later, we never had prayed for healing for anybody, but except you guys trained us. So they went over there, and they prayed for her for 30 minutes, and the Lord healed her. So she gets up, and then she said, the only reason I let you in here is because last night I had a dream, and in my dream, I saw some white women come to pray for me, and God healed me. Okay? Right? So then they go downstairs, and all the workers are like, how come you're okay? And they said, well, these girls prayed for us. Prayed for me, and I got healed. And then one of them said, can you pray for my elbow? Can you pray for my shoulder? And then the whole team started laying hands on these people, and a bunch of them got healed, and then they led a couple of them to the Lord. Well, this continued to go on for the next 2 weeks, and at the end of it, they had baptized about 4 or 5 of them. So they left on a Thursday, and on a Sunday, a church started underneath a tree. So we just barely missed it, right? But it was amazing. And then the other thing that happened is, all these kids had to go and raise money and bake cookies and so forth. And at the end of the trip, they had about $2,000. And they said, Lord, what are we going to do? We teach our people every morning, you spend an hour with the Lord, you worship, read the Word of God, and then speak to us and tell us what we're supposed to do. And so they said, Lord, what are we supposed to do? And one of them had a vision. They said, I see a vision of this building. It's a big white building. On the first floor, there's a service taking place because it's a church. The second floor is where the offices are. And the third floor, there's a bunch of dorms. And they said, we feel like God wants to give us this money to this missionary so that they can go and start a church. It's only $2,000, but that's what we feel we're supposed to do. And they prayed about it. They said, yes, we're going to do it. So they gave the $2,000 to Nick and Stephanie. And the next year, the college people showed up, and guess where they slept? On the third floor of a building where the first floor was the church. Okay, so these young people come back and they're like, I can do this. I think God's calling me. Do you understand? That's what I'm talking about, is trying to create a carefully curated experience that mobilizes young people. You can do this. Questions? I've been talking a little longer than I thought, but I know we have to end at 12, and I've got something else I want to do, but yes. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. First of all, how is church going to balance? Because in order to run every Sunday service, like a service, we need a couple of AD, and we need a worship team, and we need someone to usher, and so how can we balance to run a regular church and all those kinds of issues? And then second question is the equipment. For me, to understand how to equip a person to send them out in a mission field, is just like a doctor to train a doctor. So the doctor should go to knows how to like to go to every department to intern in the department inside the hospital.
Yeah.
So I mean, is it my concept right? Before we send the people out, is the person supposed to go to all the departments inside the church, like preschool, children ministry, 1.5, like English and Taiwanese? Because we, as a church here, is a multicultural. If the person know how to ministry every congregation, then for me, it's thinking that, oh, okay, then he's ready to go out.
That's a great question, and it depends on the kind of church you're trying to plant. If you're going to send somebody to Africa, they probably don't need to know how to do Taiwanese ministry. Right? Here's the basics. To me, the basic of a church planner is, do I know how to pray? Do I know how to find somebody? Do I know how to lead them to Christ? Do I know how to disciple them? Do I know how to start a group? That's the basics. If you're going to plant, if your desire is to plant a multi-congregational Taiwanese church in the United States, yes, that's probably important, and planting churches in the United States is more important. But for the ones overseas, I don't think that's all necessary. Yeah, but you see, if you have got a church of 15 people, you're doing it in-house, right? And you know, I understand. I think it's helpful to sort of get a mind as to what it is that you're trying to plant. Most churches aren't going to have children's ministry right from the start unless you start with 100 people. If you've got a group of 15 people, you're teaching parents how to disciple their own kids, because parents are the primary disciplers. You understand? So it has to do with the scope of the size of the church you want to plant. When we plant churches in the United States, we do a little bit more of that. I don't think it's necessary for them to have every little piece, right? But for the guys that we send out to plant local churches, I actually hire them on my staff for a couple of years so I can disciple them. And right now, you know, a couple of my staff guys, I think we're going to send them out in a couple of years to plant churches here in the U.S. Yeah. What was your first question? Oh, how do you do all this? Yeah, you know, I mean, the fact of it is that they were in Thailand for 3 weeks. It's, you know, it's okay, right? You can, you know, you guys send out short-term missions now. What I'm suggesting is that the kind of short-term missions you send out can change so that you can get more focused and get more bang for your buck in the short-term missions that you're doing. I'm not sure because I want to get to the other thing. Are there any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Great. Yeah. That's a really great question. Again, I think it would be very helpful for you guys to read this because when you're dealing with non-believers that don't have a grid for this, developing simple, transferable, and reproducing discipleship processes is really important. Okay? Evelyn was just telling me, we've been working with a church planner in Paris, and they're starting a new church planting movement in Paris. Bill's been there for about 7 years, and he's got a small team. Right now, I think they've got 7 little house churches in Paris. So Paris is a very hard place, postmodern Europe. And he's teaching them how to do evangelism and discipleship. And basically, when he leads a couple people to Christ, he starts discipling them and giving them very clear Bible lessons so that they learn how to read the Bible, how to pray, how to baptize, and how to share with their friends. And those people who are 3 or 7 week old believers share their faith and then they start discipling their friends. Now that seems kind of weird, but remember, Paul started a church in 2 and 3 weeks in Lystra and Derbe, and then he left, and they had no internet. Right? So this is why Paul went back on his third missionary journey, twice to Lystra and twice to Derbe, and appointed elders. But see, we've got to sort of think about this differently, because the way we think about church based on our own experiences isn't the only way to do church. And it's not really the way that people did church in the Bible, right? And so this is why missionaries have spent a lot of time trying to simplify some of what we're used to, because it's not all necessary. In the United States, I think it's a little more complicated, but in many other places, these simple church or house church concepts can be very, very helpful. Yeah. I mean, the first thing I would do is teach them how to hear God. Okay? I teach them how to hear God. Teach them how to share their faith and how to pray for sick people and cast out demons. Okay? I mean, I would take some time. If you look at Matthew chapter 10, this is the first short-term mission in history. And Jesus says, heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out those who have demons. Right? That's what he said. This was the job description of the first short-term mission trip ever. It's not like what we usually think about when we do Mexico. And so that's what we teach our people to do. Every morning, where are we going to go? How do we engage? How do we pray for sick people? How do we cast out demons? How do we lead people to Christ? And then we start discipling them. That's church planning, right? And so I want my young people to have as much experience in doing the Bible and doing initial church planning as possible, okay? If you want, I can sit with some of you afterwards, because I have a little teaching about the first short-term mission in history, and I'll be glad to do it with you, after we finish here, okay? Okay. Maybe I can take one other question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Oh, no, I have a whole staff. Yeah. We have congregational pastors. I have a children's pastor. I have a youth pastor. I have a college pastor, young adults pastor, family pastor. I have people that are just focused on missions, and then a bunch of administrators. So we're trying to do this all together because we try and create a structure that allows us as a church to raise up as many people as possible. And our job description is to disciple people. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we spend about 20% of our budget in doing missions, which is specifically focused on salary for people who are focused on doing overseas missions. Now, these are people on our staff. Unlike you guys, I don't have a missions budget. Okay? Every one of our missionaries has to raise 100% of their support. Okay? And like I said, we have 55 adults and kids that are on the field. Every one of them raise 100% support. We don't give a dollar. Okay? Because I don't want to be responsible for raising money for them, to be honest with you. Okay? It's a very different system than the one you're in. But I will tell you what, our people, when they decide they want to go on the mission field, they tend to raise their entire budget in 4 months. Because we've taught our people to be good givers. Okay? So they don't have a problem doing this. I just don't have to manage it all. Right?
Something. Yeah. I think also the question you're asking, we actually do have a discipleship school and also a church planting school. Yeah. And so, but before that even, the way that we give people the expectation that each and every one of us is equipped to go do the work. And so the way that we do life groups is that we do them in smaller groups, but these are like little mini churches. So as a life group leader, if they're able to reproduce their life group, so life group leader is doing pastoral care, they're praying for the sick, they're evangelizing, we've equipped the life group leaders to do that in a smaller setting, so if they could reproduce that here, they can do it anywhere in the world. So it's how we kind of want to see a lot of training happening. So someone else, the lady behind asked about equipping. We're not equipping people to do AV stuff, but we're equipping them with the principles of the kingdom, and we kind of blend that into the life of the church.
Right. We they do, but the primary thing we want them to do is lead a cell group. Because if somebody leads a cell group, then they have to pray, they have to evangelize, they have to disciple, they have to pastor, they have to multiply.
Because if you're not leading someone to Christ here, you're
not
not
going to
do
it over there.
In a very hostile situation, or
yes,
right. And ask them how many people they've led to Christ so far.
But
if
no,
they haven't led someone to Christ here, they need to be trained.
But I think the issue is that many times when people serve in our church ministries, they don't learn to evangelize. Right? So we've got to change how we're doing things so that we are focused on the right things as a church. Right? So this has to do with understanding what the end goal is and then lining up the structure of the church so that everything feeds that way. Yeah. 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 Convergence. Yeah. Okay. Now, what I want to do is just give you an example of something we did that you can get involved in. So, let me just finish this here. This summer, we're going to be involved. The Antioch Movement is doing something called Engage the Islands. Okay, and I'm just going to talk you through it a little bit so you can understand how this works. And I've talked with Casey about the possibility that you guys can do a short-term mission trip under Engage the Islands to try and help you in your process. Okay, so this is an opportunity for you and your church to take some steps forward. Sorry about this slide. In helping people move forward. So what happened is, back in 2016, Antioch as a movement was looking at the refugee crisis in Europe. We were looking at all the things that were happening with people fleeing on boats because of what happened with Syria and people running away and so forth and getting in boats. And so we decided at that time as a movement, this is the 30 churches, we have to do something about this. And this is going to give us an opportunity to do something. We've been praying for refugees and the Arab word for many, many years, and we felt like this was a key opportunity. So there was three main goals of this big program that we did. The first one is to meet practical needs. The second one was to start church planting movements, and the third one is to mobilize long-term workers for the field. Okay? And so let me just explain what that is. There's three goals. We wanted to meet the needs of refugees, we wanted to start church planting movements, and mobilize. So this mobilization is the mobilization piece, right? Whenever we do a process, we want to see some of all these things take place, not just the first one. Do you understand? So when it came to it, this was about envisioning and mobilizing and equipping. That's what we're focused on. And so there was 10 bases of operations led by experienced leaders. Each of the bases was staffed by college interns who did church planting all summer long. And then we had a series of short-term mission trips that went in 2 weeks at a time into these different cities to try and do pioneer work. Okay? And I don't know if this is going to show up. Okay, good. So over the summer, there was almost 2,000 people that went into Europe, where there was 10 cities. All these different places is where the Antioch movement went. And our church took on a base in Berlin, Germany. I think you guys have a worker there, right? So this was 2 years ago. Okay? We worked in 59 refugee camps over the summer. And this is what happened. In terms of meeting needs, we did a ton of stuff working with refugees, okay, going into refugee camps. In terms of starting movements, we saw a bunch of people come to Christ and started 79 Bible studies. And in terms of mobilizing workers, there's a lot of college students who then said, I think I want to do this. Okay? This is a big operation, but it gives you some kind of idea as to how we try and pull together short-term missions teams with mobilizing. Okay? So this summer, we're doing something called Engage the Islands, and I'm just going to go through this quickly. How this came about is, there's a series of churches and missionaries in Indonesia, and they've come up with a booklet that said there's still 129 unreached peoples in Indonesia. And they basically came to the Antioch Movement and said, can you mobilize churches to help us reach the unreached peoples here? And we said, yes. All right? And so this summer, there's going to be 16 bases in Indonesia, and our church is leading one in Bandung and also right here in Jakarta, okay? And very briefly, what's happened is that each of them is going to be led by a staff person, staffed by 20 summer interns. And so, what this is a big mobilization thing. We've got all kinds of college students that are going to spend the entire summer on the mission field working with staffers who are going to be discipling them, doing pioneering church planning. Okay, so you understand the mobilization piece here? We want our college students infected with the church planning virus, okay? They're going to work with a bunch of local interns from Indonesia. And so the churches in Indonesia are also saying, we want our young people to learn how to do church planning. So they're going to function as translators, and they're going to be part of our teams. And then we're going to have a series of short-term mission trips that are going to come in, work in refugee camps, work among unreached people groups in Muslim areas to try and raise, pray for sick people, lead people to Christ, meet practical needs, teach English, but with a focus on leading people to Christ and evangelism. And what's going to happen is that there's going to be 2-week teams that are going to come in June and July. Let me just put this all out here. Let's suppose that Pastor Casey leads a team, okay? We'll just suppose, right? So what will happen is if he has a team of 15 people from your church, we'd have to sign up pretty soon, and then you guys are going to get a bunch of online training. So everybody's going to read a bunch of online manuals, and you can do small group training together in your groups. And then what will happen is if you guys leave on June 17th, you guys would then fly to Bali, where there's a big base there. And all the short-term missions from around the United States are going to land all at the same time, and you will probably show up with about 300 or 400 other people and do a day and a half of training. And then you would fly from there into our base in Jakarta, where we have a team leader and a team of about 20 college students. And you and maybe 1 or 2 other groups will then be given a list of things to do and places to work, and your job is going to be to go find people who are hungry and pray for them and lead them to Christ. Okay? Using the power of the Spirit and so forth and so on. And then the moment that happens, when people come to faith, then we're going to start these Discovery Bible studies, like the ones they did in Lebanon, where the young people are going to be able to sit there with their translators and start teaching these people how to follow Jesus and how to share their faith. It's a hope that we can start some church planting movements. And you guys will do that for about 10 days, and then you'll fly back to Bali, and Casey will be helped by an older couple that will do a bunch of debriefing to try and help your young people to go, okay, what did I learn? What did I learn about myself? What's God speaking to me? They're going to lay hands and pray for them, okay? And then you'd come home. That's sort of what the outline is. And so what this does is it gives you an opportunity to kind of do these things. So, my role is to try and help you, right? I want to come here right now, and also in the second session on Sunday. Maybe I should do in the first session because I want to get the young people. Or maybe you can tell them to show up, okay? Right now I have it planned for the second session. And what I want to do is envision them like, this could be awesome. Right? I'm going to do that, my best to go, this is going to be awesome. And then you can use this as a way to mobilize your own people. We've set a bunch of infrastructure up, so all you have to do is create a team and get a bunch of people on it. And, what I hope happens is that as a result of it, some of your young people get infected. They're like, I want to do this, And I would encourage you, middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, young adults, I think we probably are going to have 80 people from our church that do teams this summer, And so I think you guys might be able to do it. Okay, let me see if you guys have any questions about this. Because this is a very specific thing I wanted to come and tell you about, Yeah.
所以这个短宣 ，Pastor John Low 他们教会要介绍这个短宣，跟一般的短宣不一样的是，这一个短宣呢，会 教我们职堂的概念，我们可以很实际的去看他们怎么样的做，怎么带一个短宣队进入一个地方，开始一个教会。这是跟我们的短宣不太一样，所以可以鼓励大家考虑看看。
Yeah, I'll tell you an interesting story. In the summer of 2016, we had a mixed team. It was about 7 people from our Chinese congregation. They're all, from Taiwan, in their 50s, and it was led by some of our young people in English. And we also had about 6 people from our Spanish churches. And so we had a team of Chinese, Asian Americans, and Spanish people, co-led by a young Chinese American gal and an older Hispanic guy, and they were working with refugees in Arabic. And they saw a bunch of people healed and saw a bunch of people come to Christ. It was really awesome. And it was a picture of the kingdom, All right, any questions? Yeah. Great. Now, that is a really great question. So let me just turn the shoe around the other way. I know this is you're not asking a missions question, you're asking a second generation question, right? Okay. What we know from the scriptures is that we are called to serve God. Human psychology is such that when a person focuses on themselves, it's not good for them because we become self-centered and narcissistic. The way we find our identity is understanding who God is and how we're supposed to serve. When a church focuses on young people and makes them the goal, it's going to cause them to be self-centered. Because the thing that a young person needs most of all is to understand who God is and who and in what ways they can serve. Young people need to be on mission in order to be oriented the right way. And so the thing that a church has to do is teach its people and prepare their people to be on mission, because that helps a young person understand who they really are. So this seems a little backwards, because the way to help yourself to be healthy here is to focus out there. If you focus here, you're not going to be able to do it, because young people want to have something that they can give their lives to. And it's not here, it's out there. Does this make sense to you? I know it seems backwards, right? But so, what are your names? Kitty and Lee, and how old are you guys? 26, 27. Okay. So if you look at these 2 young people, they're awesome young people. I know you all love them. You know them way better than I do, okay? Right? The way they are going to find their most life is by finding out how God's called them to serve. And your job is to help them. Your job is to help and equip and support them to be able to do the ministry that God's called them to do. Because if they get excited about it, they will find other people to help them. That's what you want. You want to empower them and give them the vision to say, man, this is the most exciting thing I've ever done. You've got to come with me on this thing, right? And yeah, my church is going to help us, right? That's what you want for them. And you see that here's the thing I understand is very complicated about an immigrant church. What you want to help them do is to be on mission. And so you got to help them figure out who their mission field is, and you got to help them to reach them. Because if their mission field is not all Taiwanese people, then they can't bring them here. That's really hard, because then they want to be involved in mission, but then they have to do it by themselves, and they're so busy with all the other stuff they're doing here at church. So this is one of these things. I understand it's hard because we're all short on resources, but you've got to think about the generational thing of passing from one generation to another and how you can help these young people to get a vision for who they are and how you can support them. Right? The reason why many of you are here is because the first generation of 30-year-olds that came here sacrificed so that the young people have something. And it's time to do that again. That's what we are called to do as older people. Right? Just like an older family, when your kids get married, you work hard all these years, and you give them $250,000 to help them to do a down payment on their house. Right? That's what we do. That's what young people need in the same way today when it comes to the mission. Okay? Yeah. Well, it's 12:01. We could spend a lot of time talking about first and second generation things. That's not really why you asked me to be here. So, yeah, it's another conference, yeah. Yeah. Are you a teacher? That's a great word you use. Okay, sorry.
I'm a PhD student, so I think
Okay.
about
Yeah.
So one thing I realized is without not just
Yeah. But
I
you
know like God does miracle work. How much
Sure.
would you
Great.
mobilize for me?
What a great question.
Sometimes it's hard to mobilize
Yes. Yeah.
how can I engage my people? Would it make more sense prior to
Yeah. That is a great question. And there's a whole bunch of different questions you threw in there, which I think is awesome. Let me just say, if the goal is for you guys to become a church planting church in much more focused way, there's a developmental process, right? So you're talking to me, our church is now 14 and a half years old. We didn't have any of this when we started, right? But 1.5 years in, I started leading short-term missions for our church. And I went to Africa 12 times myself and led teams because I figured we've got to figure this out, right? And so that's how we started the thing. We didn't start a training school in our church until we were 6 or 7 years old. So you just have to do the next thing that's in front of you. But the process is you've got to develop the apostolic spark within you. And then, yes, I think it is really important to try and learn how to do the practical things that are going on. You can talk with Evelyn afterwards about this. She actually knows of a couple young people at UC Irvine that are trying to do outreach on their campus every week using some of these principles over here. So those things are really important. We're trying to learn how to do that in Pasadena. So Evelyn leads a group of people that are out sharing their faith every week, knocking on doors, trying to figure out, like, if we're going to do this overseas, how do we do it here? So it's not like we have all the answers. In a lot of ways, I feel like our church is like in fourth grade. There's a lot of things we don't know and we're trying to figure out. So, great. Okay, I think we're like out of time, right?
Yeah. I think it would be great, like, for the mission committee specifically to spend some time, maybe while we're eating lunch, to just kind of dialogue with Pastor John. Like, what can we do as a church in our mission philosophy and our mission strategy? What does the next step even look like? Where we are now, here, how do we get one step ahead? I think that would be a great conversation to have. So if, do you have time?
Yeah,
lunch?
I do. Yeah, I do.
So
she has to go.
Okay.
But you can talk with her.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she's a medical professional. So we got some medical professionals here. I encourage you to find some time, like, later on.
But she'll be here tomorrow,
to
and you can talk with her if you want to talk with her either about the medical things or about the local outreach pieces.
That would be awesome.
Discipleship, yeah.
If you want to get trained in the new evangelism tool that I've been doing, it's very easy. A 7-year-old could do it. It's very basic, but it starts with brokenness, and everyone in this world understands brokenness.
How would you do that? You know what? Can I make a suggestion? How about, what's the name of the girl that's coming here?
Caitlin.
Maybe it'd be helpful for you to do the training on the 3 circles with Caitlin here so she can see it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess we could. What do you guys have scheduled here right now?
Today, lunch, and then it's done for today.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think, one of the reasons why people don't feel comfortable about evangelism, I mean, Paul says, always be ready to share the hope that's within you. The reason why people don't share the gospel is they don't know who to share with and they don't know what to share. So this is a training thing. It's pedagogy. It's like, okay, let us give you a tool, and then we're going to practice 5 times so that you can do it in your sleep. And then the next thing we're trying to do is teach you who to share with. How do you see if somebody's open? And how do you start a conversation? So there's some very practical things that we can train our people in. And so, again, this is all about practice and practical things, right? We don't just tell somebody, okay, why don't you just go and take a knife and do surgery on this person and take out their appendix? No, you got to go to training first, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, most churches don't train their people how to share their faith. It's just come to the church and my pastor will lead you to Christ.
Yeah.
Or, that's our thinking, but most people today will not walk into the door of a church. So it's up to us to go. And we want to train you. Learning how to share your faith is very basic.
Why don't you just tell them what happened briefly, like in 3 minutes or 4 minutes on Tuesday?
Oh, on Tuesday, I got invited to go pray for a man who has ALS, it's Lou Gehrig's disease, and basically it's when your muscles don't work anymore, and eventually you die because your diaphragm stops working. We have treatment for cancers, but not for ALS. So really it's a death sentence for this man. And someone heard me sharing about a recent healing that I had. I've been pursuing healing for over 30 years, so I've been wanting, in Matthew 10 and Luke 10, Jesus sends out first the disciples that John talked about first, and then he sends out the 72. And the thing that Jesus tells them is heal the sick. And he doesn't say pray for the sick, he says heal the sick. That means it's somehow he gives us the ability to do it, but most people don't think that way. And so I've been trying to pray for as many sick people as possible, and I've seen quite a few healings. And so here's this really impossible case, a man with ALS, had it for 3 years. And so I took a friend of mine who also has a gift of healing, and we went out there. And I felt like the Lord tell him the story about Jesus, the friends of a man who was lame, and they dug a hole in the roof, and they lowered the man down. And the first thing that Jesus says to him is, your sins are forgiven. And then he got healed. And so I told this man, I asked him, share your story. Like, I want to know something about you. And he said, well, I'm actually glad I have ALS instead of like dropping dead from a heart attack, because it's given me a chance to make amends with all the people that, broken relationship. I've gone to reconcile with this person, that person. And I go, but you've not reconciled with everybody. And he goes, what? I go, you've not reconciled with God. That's the one person you haven't done yet, and that's why we're here. And then I shared the story, and I was able to say, your sins, he received Christ. I did the 3 circles with him. Very understandable, this model of evangelism. He received Jesus, both him and his wife. And I said, now we're going to pray for your healing. Just like in the story. So I'm modeling what Jesus has done. And so I said, we're going to lay hands on you. We're going to pray for you. And as we were praying, it was the coolest thing. His muscles started twitching everywhere. His belly, I could see the muscles twitching. And then he looks up at his friend who invited us to go pray for him. And he goes, were you shaking my legs? She goes, no, I just had my hand on your knee. He goes, God's healing me. And he goes,
This man's never been in church in his life.
He's never been, his mom was Episcopalian and his wife, both of them are hostile to the gospel. When this first started happening, the friend that invited me offered to pray for him. He goes, oh no, don't pray for me. So this is what we were going into. But God, because we had been praying, God's softening his heart.
She fasted this week.
I fasted. And so basically, he received Jesus and got healed, beginning healing. And he goes, I can move my fingers. This hand he could still grip, but he can't even hold a coffee cup anymore. But he goes, oh, I can do this. And then later in the evening, I get a phone call from my friend. He's now lifting his hands. And that night, he went to go play cards with some friends up in Palos Verdes who also don't know Jesus. As soon as he walked in the door, he started proclaiming Jesus. He said, look what God did for me. And he wasn't even able to hold his cards before, but now he was holding his cards, his own cards. And so today at 1:00, I trained this friend of mine, I trained her to start discipleship with this group. He invited his friends to come. So now we trained him how to pray for his friends who don't know Jesus. Next week I'm going to go there and I'm going to share the 3 circles and have him learn how to reach his friends and lead them to Christ. And so this is like very brand new and working. Like this is really a breakthrough for me because I've been praying and asking God, lead me to the right person, a person of peace, where we could see a movement happen in his house. They've never been to church. I was really happy because that way they don't have like things that they have to get rid of. Like most people today in churches don't know how to pray and disciple and lead people to Christ. You just go sit in a pew and allow everybody else to do the work. But no, these are brand new believers. I'm giving them the DNA right now from the get-go. No, you're going to pray for your friends. And you're going to read the Bible every day. You get to learn how to commune with God and hear his voice.
So that's what you want a missionary to do, right? That's the basic skill set of what we're trying to get our people to do as missionaries, right?
And his house becomes a church. Do you understand?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pastor John and Evelyn, for this session. Man, I'm learning so much. I'm learning so much from Pastor John, and what an inspiration. And as we continue, we still got, lunchtime. We still got tomorrow to process this, and I pray that God would lead us in the right direction. Is that cool? Let us pray for also the food as well. Heavenly Father, thank you for this session. Thank you for what you are speaking to us and how you are leading us, God. I pray that you bring clarity. I pray that you bring understanding. Let us know your will for us individually and corporately as a body of Christ. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for the lunch that you have prepared for us. Bless the hands who prepared it.